Hello and welcome to DNA. So I have with me Vatsalya Srivastava, who's an economist, and with BJP's mandate going down in 2024 from what it was 2019, we'll talk today about the economic policies of the BJP and what may have backfired. So starting first, the first thing that we'll want to talk about is unemployment. So unemployment is an issue in India. India is a developing country, of course, so like other developing countries, it is an issue, but it was also one of the most hyped issues in this election campaign by the opposition also. So, do you think there has been some form of harm for the BJP from this narrative?
So we have to look at two things. One, I think one of the most important things because of course we are going through the process where a lot of results are coming in and they're contrary to expectations. So a lot of people are having to rethink what they said. But one of the things that's important to remember is that the BJP by itself, while it has lost seats, its vote share has remained relatively stable.
Same.
And they're still going to be the party that is going to be the leading partner in the coalition that creates the government. Elections used to be about winning and losing. We can talk about the numbers, of course, as we did previously. So, that still stands. So, I don't think that they were negatively affected as much as that there was a coalition that was formed against them that was able to bring together voters and ensure that the voters of one regional party also voted for the coalition partner. That said, because unemployment is something that, one, as you mentioned, every developing country struggles with. We also have to see at what point in our development process we are at. So there is a relatively large number of people. Remember, India's literacy rate has increased quite significantly over the years. Also, our enrollment in terms of tertiary education, so people who have gone to college, has also increased over the years. However, as something that has been pointed out repeatedly over many decades by now, despite the increase in the size of our economy post-liberalization, manufacturing isn't a sector that we have done terribly well in. Which means that large-scale job creation has been elusive. That is true, and that has been true for a while. Second, and this is a remnant of days gone by, where the expectation was that one of the primary things that the government did was to create jobs. Remember, the premise of the liberalization was that the space for the government in the economy decreases. Which means it was going to be less and less of the government's job to provide employment. But as and when you have a large number of people entering the workforce and not finding the kind of jobs that they thought they will, at least in perception, the blame is going to lie on the government, even if the government is not the entity that is supposed to give them jobs. So I think this government, and in general, people like me, economists like me, have not been able to communicate the idea of how a labor market works. It should not always be backstopped by the government. People's aspiration should be for higher quality work. There was recently quite a bit of insinuation that our PhDs have been applying for peon jobs. Now, as you and I both would know, this is not a new phenomenon. This has been happening for a long time. And this largely happens, and of course, like any complex problem, this is multi-causal, right? So it has many different causes. But it can be boiled down to two things. One, what is the quality of our PhDs? So you have gotten a degree, but do you have the skills to back it up? Now, typically, this has been a complaint from corporate India for a very long time, that we have these very large number of unemployable people who enter the workforce. So they have the degree, which means they have the expectations of finding a high quality job, but they don't have the capability set to be able to perform those high quality jobs. So one, there is this mismatch. Second, there is this understanding that private sector jobs are fickle. Both of us are in the private sector, so I'm guessing that at some stage we have also gone through the process. Whereas if you have a sarkari naukri, whatever grade it is, you at least have something for the rest of your life. Now that is a social pattern that hasn't changed over time. Now I think in terms of perception, why this could become an issue that was talked about repeatedly is because that pattern hasn't been broken. And this government, despite trying to do a variety of different things for 10 years, if you remember, they had this National Skill Development Council. Not many skills were developed as a result of what the council did. What that meant is that you continue to be stuck in this bad equilibrium, where a lot of young people are coming out in the market expecting, I have an engineering degree, I deserve a job at an IT company. And every second IT company is saying, I cannot continuously spend resources in training you from scratch. Can you please learn something and come out from the colleges? At the same time, this social narrative that public sector jobs or being in the government I remember when I had crossed the age for taking government exams, there was a lot of exasperation from my extended family saying that, this was a bad call. You should have at least taken it. Maybe you could have gotten somewhere.
It happens with me too, yeah.
So partly I think it is down to the government not being able to build the narrative. I think they tried.
Yeah.
There was this conversation on that you should also make samosas, become entrepreneurial. But it is one thing to say it and another thing to be able to communicate it. Because this government also, when the need has arisen, has created lots of jobs at very short intervals to appease certain groups of people. Typically this happens in, say, university and school hirings. So they have also engaged in the same process. At the same time, they have also engaged in the old process where essentially you can sit on vacancies for months and years and they would not get filled up. So it's a combination of these two. One is a persisting social narrative. Second is that you continue to use job offerings as a form of patronage that they were not able to dissociate themselves from.
Okay. So what I can understand is, so you would want to say that the precarity of private sector jobs, the perceived precarity of private sector jobs and the perceived stability of government sector jobs. And this government, so instead of directly providing jobs to people, what it was trying to intend is giving them platform to get jobs. So, and do you think that was the government's intent, and was that misread by the voter?
I think that was the intent. I think the intent was not backed up by any sort of implementation. So for instance, if you're setting up a National Skill Development Council along with an education ministry, that skill should have been developed while you're being educated, right? So there was one, they understood that there are limitations in the education setup that we have so far, which means it has to be backed up by the skill development process. I don't think they got as far as they thought they would get in terms of both being able to convince people and in terms of actually being able to train them to get good at something.
Yeah, that is despite them establishing a significant number of IITs and other such new institutions, skill institutions.
Which is the other interesting thing. This is called the fallacy of composition. So let's assume there's the two of us. The entire labor market only has two people. If you have a degree and I don't, then it's clear that you will get a better job than I will. But if both of us have degrees, then it becomes slightly more complicated. If everybody around starts getting degrees, then the value of the degree itself goes down. So the initial promise,
and then the
question
comes in.
Also, how do you assess merit? So remember, this is a conversation that also happening in very advanced countries. So the conversation of the value of a degree is happening just as intensely in countries that are 20 times richer than us, like the US, as it is happening with us. That the promise, the original promise, at least for our generation, was study hard, get a degree. Then we diluted the promise in the process. So for instance, it became easier and easier to get a degree. Now, the reason why a degreed person was valued more by the market, because it was presumed that you have worked very hard to get it. Now, if it is understood by everybody that you don't have to work very hard to get it, then the value of that degree has gone down. If it has gone down, then the promise has failed, because the promise was get a degree, get a job. So that social narrative has not caught on in terms of socially we understanding that this is where we are stuck at. And the government, I think, failed in its ability to be able to communicate this, that the end goal is a job, but the process is just as important. So you have to get good at things. And there we can try and help you, which my own reading is they haven't been particularly good at being able to help or to build a narrative as to, if we are saying make in India, our objective is not just to somehow make in India so that you get a job. The objective is to make the world's best things in India, for which you have to be highly trained, you have to be highly motivated. That hasn't really happened. So job, for the longest time, as it was many years ago, continued to be now as almost as an entitlement. I have done what the government asked me to do, which is to get a degree. Now give me a job. That narrative could not be changed, and which is why I think the conversation this time too centered around it repeatedly. Whereas, at least in the economist community, for a very long time, there has been an acknowledgement of the fact that, as you said, it's not the government's job to dole out jobs. But we got caught up in that conversation again because we are currently in this mix of multiple currents coming at the same time, lack of adequate skilling, lack of large-scale manufacturing, which we haven't been able to build up, and a social narrative that says somehow please get a government job, and that means that it's easier for you to get married, it's easier for you to have access to a lot of different things.
So does that also mean that somewhere or the other, the private sector and the expectations of the government that the private sector would bloom and provide more jobs, that has not worked out?
Yeah, I don't think that has. And so I'll give you a concrete example. One of the ideas in the skill development space was that we should encourage companies to take on apprenticeships. So take apprentices, young people, train them, and in the process of training, then they meet the skill requirement that the industry had initially. But here's what economists call an incentive problem. Let's say you're a factory owner. You hire me as an apprentice, which means initially I know very little. So essentially I'm a cost center. You are spending money on training me. Now, if you spend money on training me and I continue to work for you after my apprenticeship, that's good for you. But what happens in an even reasonably competitive market? You will train me for 6 months and then you will say, here's 10,000 rupees a month, work for me. Your competitor who has a factory 2 kilometers away will come to me and say, here's 10,100 rupees, come and work for me. Which means now that your competitor is getting a trained person by spending just 100 rupees extra, where you had to spend a lot of money over the first 6 months. Which means it is not incentive compatible for you to train me. You will know this, your competitor will know this, eventually neither of you will end up training anybody.
That's also somewhere to do with the brain drain thing that happens in India, and that's one of the reasons. Yeah. So this was a short analysis and a short pondering of thought on the unemployment issue in India and how it panned out for the BJP government, and if it may have worked in the reduced mandate. Keep watching us for more such.